Welcome back to Dark Secrets Chronicles. Today's tale is one of love, betrayal, and how trust can be shattered in ways we never expect. Meet Jack Thornton, a man who had it all, or so it seemed, a successful architect living in a beautiful home just outside Denver, Colorado. Jack's life looked picture-perfect to anyone who looked from the outside. He had the dream job, a stunning house, and a loving wife, Nora. They were college sweethearts, a couple everyone envied for their seemingly perfect life together. But sometimes the outside doesn't tell the whole story. Jack had always been a man of ambition, someone who worked long hours, always striving to meet his goals. As an architect, he had built his career from the ground up, and with his hard work had come rewards. His business was thriving, and his personal life seemed just as fulfilling. But there was a tension in the air, a subtle unease that Jack could never quite put his finger on. The long hours, the missed dinners, the quiet weekends spent working instead of relaxing, they were starting to take a toll. And though Jack tried to convince himself it was just the pressures of his career, a part of him knew it was more than that. Inside their home, Jack's thoughts were interrupted as he removed his jacket and hung it in the hallway closet. He paused for a moment, his eyes lingering on a family photo hanging on the wall. In the picture, he and Nora stood together on their wedding day, smiling wide, caught in the glow of a love that seemed as eternal as the mountains in the background. But as Jack looked at the photo, he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something had shifted. His gaze drifted over the house, the quiet space that had once been filled with laughter and conversation. Now it felt cold, almost foreign. Nora was upstairs, likely finishing up some work or reading a book. She was always busy with something. Jack admired her strength, her intelligence, and her drive. But in recent months, there had been moments when he felt like he didn't really know her anymore. They had grown into different versions of themselves, both so caught up in their individual worlds that the connection they once shared seemed to fade a little more each day. Jack made his way up the stairs, his footsteps slow and measured, like a man bracing himself for something he wasn't sure he wanted to face. He passed the open door to their bedroom and saw Nora sitting at her desk, typing away on her laptop. Her auburn hair was pulled into a messy bun, and the soft glow from her desk lamp illuminated her face. She looked up as he entered, a soft smile appearing on her lips, but there was something distant in her eyes. It was the kind of smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, and Jack had seen it before. "Hey, babe," Nora said, closing her laptop. "How was your day?" "Busy," Jack replied, his voice flat. He set his briefcase down on the bed and sat beside her. His mind was racing with thoughts he didn't know how to express. "Listen, we need to talk." Nora's smile faded a little, and she studied him closely. "What's wrong?" Jack hesitated, his gaze moving toward the window. The night was beginning to fall, and the city lights of Denver twinkled in the distance. The view had always been one of his favorite parts of the house. But tonight, it just seemed distant, like everything in his life was becoming more and more out of reach. "I don't know," Jack said, shaking his head. "I just feel like things aren't right between us. I don't know if it's me or if it's you, but it feels like we're drifting apart." Nora's face softened, and she reached out to place her hand on his. "Jack, we're just busy. You know how it is. You're working a lot, I'm working too. It's not a big deal." But Jack could hear the underlying uncertainty in her voice. She was trying to reassure him, but there was something she wasn't saying. He could feel it. The tension between them had been building for months, and tonight, it was impossible to ignore. "I don't know, Nora," Jack said, his voice quieter now. "It's more than that. It feels like we're both just pretending everything's fine." Nora pulled her hand away, her expression hardening. "You're being paranoid. Nothing's changed. I'm just busy, that's all." Jack didn't respond. He wasn't sure what to say anymore. The silence that hung in the air between them felt heavier now, more suffocating. He could feel the weight of the conversation he didn't want to have but knew he had to. Later that night, Jack sat alone in the living room, his mind racing. He replayed their conversation over and over, searching for signs, for clues. Anything that could explain the growing distance between him and Nora. He had always prided himself on being a man of logic, of facts. But tonight, emotions were clouding his judgment. He felt as though he was missing something crucial. That's when the phone rang. Jack glanced at the screen and saw the name of his old friend, Michael Blackwell, flashing on the display. Michael was a private investigator, someone Jack had known for years. They'd met in college, and while their paths had diverged since then, Jack pursuing his career in architecture, Michael in the world of investigative work, they'd stayed in touch over the years. Jack had even hired him a few times to look into some personal matters. But tonight, Michael's call was unexpected. They hadn't spoken in months. "Hello," Jack answered, his voice still tight with the lingering tension from earlier. "Jack." Michael's voice came through, low and serious. "I need to talk to you. It's about Nora." Jack's heart skipped a beat. "What about Nora?" There was a pause on the other end, and Jack could hear Michael's breath, like he was choosing his words carefully. "I've been following her," Michael said, his tone heavy. "And I've got something you need to see. It's not what you think." Jack's stomach tightened. "What do you mean? What are you talking about?" "Listen," Michael cut in, his voice more urgent now. "I can't explain it all over the phone, but you need to meet me. Now, I've got proof. Proof that she's been seeing someone else." The words hit Jack like a punch to the gut. His breath caught in his throat. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. Nora, his wife, was having an affair? It didn't make sense. But there was something in Michael's voice that made Jack take him seriously. Michael wasn't one to make baseless accusations. "Where?" Jack asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Café Ralston," Michael replied. "I'll be there in an hour. Come alone." Jack hung up the phone and sat there in the dark, the weight of the world pressing down on him. What had just happened? Was Michael telling the truth? Was it really possible that Nora, the woman he had built a life with, had betrayed him? The thought sent a cold shiver down his spine. He had trusted her. They had built a life together. But now, everything felt like it was crumbling beneath his feet. There was a part of him that wanted to deny it, to brush it off as some sort of mistake or misunderstanding. But deep down, he knew he had to face the truth, whatever it was. Jack stood up, his legs unsteady as he walked toward the door. He grabbed his coat, his hands shaking slightly as he pulled it on. The city lights outside seemed to mock him, their bright glow reflecting off the wet streets, a stark contrast to the darkness settling in his heart. Tonight, everything was about to change. Jack's heart raced as he stepped out of his house and into the cold night. The city of Denver lay ahead of him, its skyline bathed in the golden light of street lamps, but everything felt distant. A part of him wanted to turn back, wanted to pretend that Michael's words were just a bad dream, a miscommunication. But another part of him, the part he'd buried deep down for months, knew this wasn't going away. It was real and it was happening. His world was about to change forever. He arrived at the cafe, a quiet little spot tucked away from the main streets. The neon lights above the door flickered as he approached, the sound of footsteps echoing in the empty street. He paused for a moment, taking a deep breath, and then stepped inside. The warm air hit him immediately, a stark contrast to the cold he had just stepped out of. It smelled of coffee and old wood, the kind of place where secrets were whispered under hushed breaths. Michael was sitting in the corner booth, looking out the window as though waiting for someone. His usual calm demeanor was gone. There was an edge to him tonight, something in his posture that spoke of urgency. When he saw Jack, his expression softened slightly, but the tension in his eyes didn't fade. "Jack," Michael said, standing up as Jack slid into the seat across from him. "You came." Jack didn't answer at first. His mind was racing, his emotions in turmoil. His thoughts were spinning in circles. Betrayal, shock, anger, and fear all fighting for dominance in his mind. "Tell me everything," Jack said, his voice tight, betraying his attempts to hold it together. Michael hesitated, clearly trying to find the right words. "I've been following Nora for the past few weeks," he began. "At first, I thought I was overreacting, but then I started noticing things, patterns. Late nights, business trips that didn't add up. And then one day, I saw her with him. Jack's stomach twisted. Him? Michael nodded, his gaze shifting uneasily. Jake Carter, your business partner. I didn't want to believe it at first, but I followed them. To a hotel. And they were… Well, let's just say it wasn't a business meeting. The room seemed to close in on Jack as Michael's words sank in. Jake, his best friend. The man he trusted with his business. The man who had been by his side for years. And now he was betraying him, betraying them in the worst way possible. Are you sure? Jack asked, his voice low, almost as if speaking louder would make the reality of it too much to bear. Michael slid a manila envelope across the table. These are the photos. I've got everything you need. I've been doing this for a while, Jack. I wouldn't show you something unless I was sure. Jack's hand trembled slightly as he opened the envelope. Inside were dozens of photos, each one more damning than the last. There was Nora, laughing, her hand on Jake's arm, looking at him in a way that Jack had never seen. In another photo, they were seated together at a restaurant, the intimacy between them almost palpable. And then, there was the final photo, a snapshot of Jake and Nora in a hotel lobby, their faces close, sharing a kiss. The timestamp on the photo confirmed that this wasn't an isolated incident. This had been going on for months. Jack sat back, the weight of the evidence sinking in. His chest tightened as the shock of it all hit him. He had seen the signs, but he hadn't wanted to believe them. And now, in front of him was the proof, the brutal, undeniable truth. Michael watched him quietly, giving him the space he needed to process. Jack could feel his heart pounding in his ears, the anger building inside of him. This wasn't just about a betrayal of his trust. This was about everything he had worked for, the life he had built with Nora, the business he had created with Jake. It was all falling apart. I need to talk to her, Jack said suddenly, his voice cold. Michael nodded, his face serious. I understand. But Jack, you need to be careful. You're angry and I get it. But don't do anything you'll regret. Jack stood up, his decision made. I don't care. She deserves to know that I know. Michael stood too, reaching out a hand. Jack, wait. Just take a moment. You don't have to do this right now. But Jack was already walking away, the door to the cafe swinging behind him. He needed answers. He needed to confront Nora, to hear her explain herself, or at least hear her try. The drive home felt like a blur. Jack's mind was spinning, his heart racing. The photo of Jake and Nora kissing kept flashing in his mind. How long had this been going on? How many times had Jack been blind to the truth? It wasn't just Nora who had betrayed him. It was Jake too, his best friend. The person who should have had his back, who should have been the one to help him through tough times, not the one causing them. When Jack arrived home, the house was eerily quiet. Nora's car was parked in the driveway, but there was no sign of her inside. He walked through the house, his footsteps heavy on the wooden floors. He passed their bedroom, where he had seen her earlier, and then he saw her. Nora was sitting at the kitchen table, her head down, her fingers tapping nervously on the surface. Jack, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack didn't answer at first. He stood in the doorway, his eyes locked on her. This woman, his wife, had been the one person he had trusted above all else. But now he felt like he didn't even know her. She looked up at him, her eyes wide, filled with a mixture of guilt and fear. Jack, He held up his hand, cutting her off. I know. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with the weight of their meaning. Nora's face paled, and she stood up quickly, as though she wanted to reach for him, to explain herself. But Jack couldn't look at her. Not like this. Jake, Jack said, his voice barely audible. You and Jake. I've seen the photos. I know everything. Nora's hands shook as she took a step toward him. Jack, I didn't mean for it to happen. It was a mistake. I never wanted to hurt you. Jack's fists clenched at his sides. A mistake? You've been lying to me for months, Nora. How long were you going to keep this up? How many more lies were you planning to tell me before I found out the truth? She stepped back, her face crumpling with regret. It wasn't like that. I never meant to fall for him. It just happened. I didn't know how to tell you. Jack's anger flared, and he took a step forward, his voice rising. How could you do this? You were my wife. I trusted you. You were my person, Nora. And you... He stopped himself, unable to finish the sentence. Tears welled up in Nora's eyes. I never meant to hurt you. I swear it was a mistake. A stupid mistake. But I love you, Jack. I never stopped loving you. But Jack wasn't listening anymore. His mind was already made up. I don't know if I can believe you anymore, he said quietly. I don't know if I can trust you again. He turned away, walking out of the kitchen, leaving Nora standing there, her hands trembling as she tried to process the weight of his words. Jack didn't know where he was going. He just needed to get out of the house, out of this suffocating situation. The night air hit him again as he stepped outside, the chill biting at his skin. He walked aimlessly through the streets, his mind a whirlwind of emotions. The anger, the hurt, the betrayal. It all mixed together in a storm of confusion. As he walked, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced at the screen. Another message from Michael. Jack, I'm sorry, but there's more to this than you know. Call me when you get a chance. Jack stared at the message, his mind racing again. More? What else could there possibly be? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more updates on this story. Stay tuned, because the twists are far from over. The night was cold, the silence heavy around Jack as he walked aimlessly through the darkened streets. His heart was still pounding, and his mind was racing. He had confronted Nora, he had seen the pictures, but nothing felt real. How could this be happening? His entire life, the marriage, the trust, had been built on a foundation he now realized was completely shattered. He kept walking, the rhythmic sound of his footsteps mixing with the distant hum of traffic. Everything around him seemed distant, out of focus. Jack felt like he was trapped in a nightmare, unable to wake up. His phone buzzed again. This time it was a call from Michael. Jack. Michael's voice came through, filled with urgency. You there? Jack didn't answer immediately. He couldn't find the words. The weight of everything he had learned tonight was too much. But Michael's voice broke through the fog in his mind. Listen, I don't know what Nora told you, but there's something else going on here. It's bigger than just her and Jake. There's someone else pulling the strings, Jack. Jack's heart skipped a beat. What do you mean? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't have all the details, but I've been digging, and I think your business partner, Jake, might be involved in something more than just an affair. Michael continued, his tone heavy with concern. He's been in some pretty shady dealings. And it's not just Nora he's been playing with. Jack stopped in his tracks, his mind reeling. What are you talking about? What's this really about? Michael's voice dropped even lower, as if making sure no one else could overhear. I think Jake's in over his head. I think he's been laundering money for some bad people. And if you don't act fast, you're going to be dragged down with him. I need you to trust me on this. Jack's blood ran cold. The betrayal, the affair, those were bad enough. But this was something else entirely. His business partner, his best friend, a man he trusted with his career and his life, was involved in illegal activities. The pieces of the puzzle were coming together in a way Jack never could have imagined. I'm coming over, Jack said, his voice firm despite the chaos in his mind. We need to talk. The air was thick with tension as Jack pulled up to Michael's office. The building was dark, its windows reflecting the harsh glow of streetlights. The place looked empty, abandoned almost, but Jack knew better than to trust appearances now. He stepped out of his car, his fingers trembling slightly as he locked the door behind him. When he entered the building, Michael was waiting for him in the dimly lit lobby, his face serious, his eyes shadowed with concern. There was no usual banter, no easy smile. This wasn't a conversation about old times or catching up. This was business, dangerous, high-stakes business. Jack, Michael said, ushering him inside. You're not going to like what I have to say. Jack said nothing, his chest tight with anticipation. He followed Michael into the back office, where a stack of files sat on the desk, the dim light casting long shadows across the room. Michael motioned for him to sit. I've been investigating Jake, Michael began, his tone low. And the more I dug, the worse it got. He's been moving money for people you don't want to be associated with. I'm talking about some serious players, Jack. People who don't take kindly to betrayal. They've been using your firm as a front. And I think they've been pulling the strings in your business without you even knowing it. Jack's mind was reeling. He had always prided himself on being smart, on being in control of his own business. But this was a nightmare he wasn't prepared for. You're telling me that Jake's been laundering money through my firm? Jack asked, his voice tight with disbelief. Michael nodded grimly. It's not just him. There's someone higher up involved. Someone who's been manipulating everything, using your firm as a cover for their dirty dealings. I think you've been caught in a web you can't see. Jack's hands clenched into fists as he leaned forward. And Nora? He asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Where does she fit into all this? Michael hesitated, as if weighing his next words. I think she's in the dark about most of it. But there's more, Jack. Someone close to you is involved, pulling strings in ways you don't understand. You need to figure out who before it's too late. Jack felt the world shift beneath him. It wasn't just an affair. It wasn't just Jake betraying him. Someone else was pulling the strings, and the consequences of not acting could be catastrophic. I need to talk to Jake, Jack said, standing up abruptly. I need to get to the bottom of this now. Michael grabbed his arm, stopping him. You don't get it, Jack. You can't just confront him. It's not safe. You don't know who you're dealing with. But Jack was already moving toward the door, determination in his eyes. I don't care anymore, Michael. I've lost everything. I'm not walking away from this without answers. When Jack arrived at Jake's apartment, the place felt like it was miles away from the warm, friendly place he had once considered a second home. The lights inside were dim, and the blinds were pulled shut, as if Jake had been trying to hide from something or someone. Jack's hand hovered over the doorbell for a moment, his heart pounding in his chest. The betrayal, the lies, the criminal activities, all of it had led him here. This was the moment of truth. Everything would come to light tonight. He rang the doorbell. Jake answered, looking disheveled and surprised to see Jack standing in front of him. His face was pale, his hair unkempt, as though he had been lost in thought or hiding from something. Jack's stomach twisted as he looked at his friend, a man he had trusted for years, a man who had now become something else entirely. Jack, Jake said, his voice tight, what are you doing here? I think you know why I'm here, Jack replied, his voice calm but filled with fury. I know about you and Nora. Jake's face faltered, a flicker of guilt flashing across his features. But he quickly masked it, his expression hardening. Jack, it's not what you think. Jack stepped forward, his fists clenched. Don't lie to me. I saw the photos. I know everything. Jake opened his mouth to respond, but Jack cut him off. And I know about the money, the laundering, the people you've been involved with. You think I didn't notice the things going wrong in the business? You think I didn't feel the weight of what was happening? You were using me, Jake. Using my firm, my trust, to cover your tracks. Jake's eyes widened, a brief moment of panic flashing across his face before he quickly regained control. It's not like that, Jack. You don't understand. I never meant for it to go this far. Jack's anger flared. It's too late for apologies. You've ruined everything. The business, the trust, our friendship. And Nora. He shook his head, the pain evident in his eyes. How could you do this? Jake stood silent for a moment, his shoulders sagging. Then, in a low voice, he spoke. I didn't have a choice, Jack. I'm in too deep. They were going to kill me if I didn't comply. They told me to stay quiet, to keep everything under wraps. And when Nora got involved, it just happened. I never meant to hurt you, man. Jack's chest tightened with a mix of disbelief and anger. You think that makes it okay? You think that's an excuse? Jake looked at him with pleading eyes. I didn't want this, Jack, but I had no other option. You've got to believe me. Jack's mind raced. There was something Jake wasn't saying, something he wasn't telling him. But Jack wasn't sure he cared anymore. The betrayal was too much. Who else is involved? Jack demanded, his voice breaking. Who's behind this? Jake hesitated, looking around as if afraid of being watched. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. It's bigger than you think. The people behind this, they have connections everywhere. I don't know how far it goes, but you've got to get out of this, Jack, before it's too late. Jack's mind was spinning. The truth was more complicated than he could have imagined. But one thing was certain, his life was no longer his own. And the game he had been playing was about to get a lot more dangerous. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more updates on this thrilling journey. Trust me, the truth is about to get even darker. As Jack left Jake's apartment, his mind was a storm of thoughts. His best friend had betrayed him. His wife had betrayed him. But the biggest revelation of all, the criminal operation involving his firm, was something he had never anticipated. The world he thought he knew was dissolving in front of him, piece by piece. He felt both numb and furious, overwhelmed by the weight of everything he had learned. But one thing was crystal clear now, he couldn't walk away from this. The drive back home felt like a blur. Every turn, every red light seemed to taunt him, a reminder of how out of control his life had become. His thoughts circled back to Nora. What had really happened between them? Was she just a pawn in Jake's game? Or had she truly betrayed him? And what about Jake? Was he the mastermind behind it all? Or had he too been manipulated by something bigger? The more Jack thought about it, the more tangled the web seemed. When Jack pulled into his driveway, he was exhausted. Mentally, emotionally, physically. But as soon as he stepped out of his car, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out and saw a message from Michael. Jack, it's getting worse. I found something you need to know. Meet me at the office now. Jack stared at the message, his pulse quickening. What else could there possibly be? Had Michael uncovered more about Jake's involvement? Or was there another twist waiting to hit him like a punch in the gut? He didn't waste time. Without a second thought, he got back in his car and sped toward Michael's office. His mind raced with the possibility that whatever Michael had found, it would bring everything crashing down even harder. It was too much to process, too many unanswered questions swirling in his head. Michael was already waiting when Jack arrived. He was pacing back and forth, his brow furrowed with anxiety. The sight of him only deepened Jack's sense of foreboding. Michael stopped when he saw Jack approach. Jack, I don't even know where to start, Michael said, his voice tight with stress. What I found, it's not just about Jake. It's about everyone. Jack didn't waste time. What do you mean? What else is there? Michael led Jack into the back office, where a series of files lay scattered across the desk. I've been digging deeper into the people Jake's been working with, and I've found some connections that go beyond him, beyond your firm. There's someone else involved in all of this. Someone at a much higher level than Jake. Jack's stomach dropped. Who? Michael hesitated. I didn't want to tell you this over the phone, but the person behind all of this, it's someone you'd never suspect. It's Nora. Jack froze, the words reverberating through his mind like an echo. His wife, the woman he had loved for years, the one person he thought he could trust, the one person who had betrayed him in the worst possible way. I don't understand, Jack finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. How could Nora be involved? Michael stepped closer, holding up a folder. This is what I found. He opened it, revealing a set of documents and photos. Nora's been laundering money through the firm. She's been working with Jake all along. And it goes deeper than you can imagine. There's a whole network, Jack. A whole operation. Jack's mind was spinning. Nora? The woman who had stood by his side for all these years? The one he had trusted with everything? He couldn't make sense of it. But why? Why would she do this? Michael shook his head. I don't know. But the evidence is clear. Nora's been involved in this for months. Maybe even longer. She's not the person you think she is. Jack staggered back from the desk, his mind reeling. Every decision, every moment he had shared with Nora, now seemed like a lie. He remembered the way she had looked at him earlier that night, the way she had tried to explain away everything. The guilt, the defensiveness, it all made sense now. "I need to see her," Jack said, his voice hardening with resolve. "I need to confront her. Right now." Michael's eyes widened. "Jack, listen to me. I know you're angry. I know you feel betrayed. But you need to be careful. You can't go after her like this. You don't know what she's capable of, or who else is involved." But Jack wasn't listening. His mind was set. Nora had crossed a line. She had lied to him, manipulated him, and now he had to face her. He couldn't let this go any longer. "I'm going to find her," Jack said firmly. "And when I do, I'm going to get the truth. All of it." When Jack arrived at the house, the weight of what he was about to do hung heavily over him. His fists clenched at his sides, his heart racing with a mix of anger and fear. He had no idea how Nora would react to him knowing everything, but he couldn't let this go. He couldn't go another minute living a lie. He stepped inside, the familiar silence greeting him. The house, once a home full of love and laughter, now felt cold and empty. He called out for Nora, his voice echoing in the hall. There was no answer. He checked the bedroom, the office, and the kitchen, his frustration building with every step. Where was she? Had she already fled? Was she hiding from him? From the truth? Finally, he heard a faint sound, a soft shuffle of feet behind him. He turned around and saw Nora standing in the doorway, her face pale, her eyes wide with fear. "Jack," she whispered, her voice trembling. "What's going on?" Jack took a step toward her, his anger bubbling to the surface. "What's going on?" he repeated, his voice rising. "You've been lying to me, Nora. I know about you and Jake. I know about the money, about the operation. And I know that you've been a part of all of it." Nora took a step back, her hands trembling as she held them up defensively. "Jack, I didn't mean for this to happen. I didn't know how deep it went." "How deep?" Jack spat. "How deep does it have to go before you tell me the truth? How long were you going to keep pretending everything was fine?" Nora's eyes filled with tears, but Jack couldn't bring himself to feel sympathy for her. "I was trying to protect you," she said, her voice breaking. "I didn't want you to get involved in this mess. But I couldn't stop it. Couldn't stop Jake. I'm so sorry, Jack. I didn't know how to get out." Jack's anger surged, but something in her words stopped him cold. She hadn't been the one to orchestrate it all. She had been pulled into it, just like Jake. But that didn't change the fact that she had lied to him. She had kept him in the dark, played him for a fool. "You should have come to me, Nora," Jack said, his voice low and cold. "You should have told me the truth." She shook her head, her tears falling freely now. "I couldn't. I was scared. I was in too deep. I didn't know how to get out." Jack turned away, his fists clenched at his sides. He couldn't do this. He couldn't look at her the same way anymore. The woman he had loved, the woman he had trusted, was now nothing more than a stranger to him. "I can't keep living like this," Jack said, his voice hoarse. "I can't be with someone who lied to me. I need to get out of here." As Jack turned to leave, Nora collapsed to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably. Jack's heart ached, but he knew he had no other choice. He had to leave. He walked out of the house, his steps heavy, his mind clouded with anger and confusion. His world was broken, and he had no idea how to put it back together. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for the latest updates. The twists and turns of this story aren't over yet. Stay tuned for more. As Jack drove away from the house, he could feel the weight of everything pressing down on him. His heart pounded in his chest, and his hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. The confrontation with Nora had been everything he feared and more. She hadn't just lied to him. She had betrayed him in the most unimaginable way. The woman he had shared his life with, the woman he had trusted with everything, had been involved in a criminal operation that spanned months. And the worst part? He couldn't even be sure she was fully innocent in all of it. His mind was racing with unanswered questions. Was Nora truly just a pawn in this whole game? Had she been forced into this situation by Jake and the others? Or had she been an active participant all along, hiding behind a facade of guilt and regret? Jack didn't know anymore, and that uncertainty gnawed at him. But there was something else, something more pressing that kept him up at night. The money laundering scheme, the shady dealings, the criminals pulling the strings. It was all connected, and Jack knew that he had to go deeper into the web to get the answers he so desperately needed. But how far could he go without putting himself in danger? His phone buzzed again, and for a moment he considered ignoring it. But then he saw the name on the screen, Michael. Jack! Michael's voice crackled through the speaker, tight and urgent. You need to listen to me. Things are moving fast. You've got to act now before it's too late. Jack's pulse quickened. What are you talking about? What's going on? There's been a shift, Michael said, his voice low. Jake's gone into hiding. And Nora, well, I'm afraid she might be involved in something bigger than you realize. You have to meet me. It's the only way to figure this out before it spirals even further. Jack's mind was racing again, every instinct telling him to go, to confront whatever was lurking in the shadows. His life, his business, his relationship, all of it hung by a thread. The stakes were higher now than they had ever been. And the only way forward was through the chaos, no matter how dangerous it seemed. I'm on my way, Jack said, his voice firm, as the wheels of his decision started to turn. It wasn't just about his marriage anymore. It was about everything. The truth, the consequences, and the choices he had to make. When Jack arrived at Michael's office, the air seemed thick with tension. Michael was waiting by the door, his expression grim. There was a coldness to the way he moved, as if the weight of everything that had been happening was finally taking its toll. Jack, Michael said, his eyes scanning the empty office. We're running out of time. I don't know how much longer we have before things go south. Tell me what's going on, Jack demanded, his voice rough with exhaustion and frustration. I've had enough of the games. I need answers. Michael led him into the back room, where a large map covered one wall, with strings connecting various names and locations. It looked like something out of a spy thriller, a tangled web of connections, deceit, and danger. The map had been pieced together with photographs, documents, and notes, all pointing to a network much larger than Jack could have ever imagined. This is what I've been working on, Michael said, gesturing to the map. The people behind all of this, it's bigger than you think. It's not just Nora and Jake. There's someone else pulling the strings. Jack stared at the map, his heart pounding in his chest as the pieces began to fall into place. He could see the names of high-profile individuals, business leaders, and even politicians, all connected by thin red lines. It was like a game of chess with everyone playing their part. But Jack was no longer a spectator in this game. He was a player, and the stakes were higher than ever. Who else is involved? Jack asked, his voice barely a whisper. Michael looked at him, his face pale. The person behind this, the one pulling the strings, is someone you know well. Someone you trust. Jack's breath caught in his throat. Who? Who's behind this? Michael hesitated, as if struggling with the weight of the revelation. Then, he spoke the name Jack never thought he would hear. Your father. Jack's entire world tilted on its axis. My father? He repeated, his voice cracking. That's impossible. My father has nothing to do with this. Michael nodded slowly, his expression solemn. I've been digging into his business dealings. I found evidence linking him to the operation, money laundering, kickbacks, the whole thing. And it's not just him. There's a whole network of people working together. And Jake and Nora, they're just pieces in this game. Jack's mind was reeling. His father, the man who had always been a distant figure in his life, was at the center of everything. The revelation hit Jack like a sledgehammer. How could he have been so blind? His father had always been a successful businessman, a man who had built an empire from the ground up. But Jack had never suspected that the empire was built on lies, deceit, and crime. I need to talk to him, Jack said, his voice barely above a whisper. I need to know the truth. I need to hear it from him. Michael shook his head, his voice urgent. Jack, you don't understand. Your father is dangerous. If he's involved in this, it's not just about business anymore. He's going to do whatever it takes to protect himself, even if it means going after you. Jack felt a cold shiver run down his spine. His father, his own flesh and blood, was capable of something so dark. And now Jack was caught in the middle of it. There was no turning back. "I have no choice," Jack said, his voice firm despite the fear gripping his chest. "I need answers, and I'm going to get them. I'm going to confront him, no matter what." Michael tried to stop him, but Jack was already on his way out the door. The final confrontation was coming. Jack could feel it in his bones. He didn't know what would happen when he faced his father, but he knew one thing for sure. The truth had to come out. Jack drove to his father's mansion, the weight of the world on his shoulders. The grand estate loomed in front of him, its lights casting long shadows across the driveway. This was it, the place where everything had started, where Jack had grown up, and where everything he had believed about his family was about to be shattered. When he stepped inside, the house felt empty, despite the grandeur of its design. The walls were lined with old family portraits, but they didn't comfort Jack the way they once had. Instead, they felt like a reminder of everything that had been built on lies. His father was sitting in his study, looking over documents, as though nothing had changed. When Jack entered, his father didn't look up at first. But when he finally did, Jack saw the flicker of recognition in his eyes. "Jack," his father said, his voice calm, almost too calm. "What brings you here?" "I know what you're involved in," Jack said, his voice low but steady. "The money laundering, the network. I know everything." His father's eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about?" Jack stepped forward, the rage and betrayal swelling inside him. "You've been using me, using the business I built, as a front. You've been pulling the strings behind all of this. And I'm done being in the dark." His father stood up slowly, his expression shifting from calm to something more dangerous. "You have no idea what you're talking about, Jack. You're making a big mistake. This is bigger than you, bigger than any of us. You don't understand the risks you're taking." Jack's heart raced as he realized the gravity of the situation. His father wasn't just involved, he was at the center of it all. And now, Jack was standing at the precipice of a decision that would change everything. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to stay up to date. The next chapter of this dark story is about to unfold. Jack stood in front of his father, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The grand study felt suffocating, filled with portraits of generations past, all frozen in time, silent witnesses to the legacy of the Thornton family. But in that moment, Jack realized that the legacy wasn't one of honor or integrity. It was built on lies, manipulation, and now betrayal. His father, still standing across from him, didn't show the shock or guilt Jack expected. Instead, there was only a calm, cold resolve in his eyes, a recognition that this confrontation had been inevitable. "Jack, you don't understand what you're getting yourself into," his father said, his voice smooth and controlled, like he was still trying to pull the strings. "This isn't just about you or me anymore. This is about something much bigger. You don't know who you're dealing with." Jack clenched his fists at his sides, fighting the surge of anger that threatened to overtake him. "I know exactly what I'm dealing with, Dad. You've been hiding behind the family name, using it to run your operation. All these years, this whole business. It's all a lie." The air in the room felt heavier with each word. Jack's father didn't flinch. He walked slowly toward his desk, as if to put some distance between them, his hand brushing over the edge of a file that lay there, untouched for the moment. "You've never understood, have you?" His father's voice turned colder, more calculating. "This world doesn't work on ideals, Jack. You wanted to play the good guy, the law-abiding businessman, but you've been a fool. Do you think they would have spared you if you didn't play along? You were just a tool, a piece in the game just like everyone else." Jack felt his heart drop as his father's words hit him. His entire life, the work he had done to build his firm, his ambition, it had all been part of some grand scheme that Jack had never even suspected. For the first time, he saw his father for what he really was, a man who would stop at nothing to maintain his power, no matter the cost. "I don't care about your excuses, Dad. I care about what's happening right now. You've ruined everything. The firm, the family, everything I thought I knew about my life. Jack's voice cracked slightly as the betrayal began to settle in. His father turned toward him with a smirk that sent a shiver down Jack's spine. "You don't understand the stakes, Jack. If you want to get out of this, if you want to survive, you need to walk away. You need to let it go. I won't protect you anymore if you don't. You're in too deep now. They'll come for you, just like they've come for all of us. If you're not with me, you're against me." Jack's chest tightened, a mix of fear and rage rising in him. His father had just issued an ultimatum. It was clear now there was no going back. There was no way to fix this, no way to put things back the way they were. Jack's choices now were stark. Stand by his father and the empire built on lies, or fight for something, anything that was real. "I don't know you anymore," Jack said, his voice barely a whisper. The words stung, but they needed to be said. "I can't be part of this. Not anymore." His father's smirk disappeared, replaced by an almost unreadable expression. The room grew silent as the two men locked eyes, the weight of the moment thick between them. Then, his father sighed, a resigned sound that made Jack's stomach churn. "I knew you'd say that. You've always been weak, Jack. Always wanting to do things the right way. Well, guess what? The world doesn't care about right and wrong. Cares about power. And you've just signed your own death warrant by walking out that door." Jack felt the finality of his father's words. There was no love left in this house, no loyalty. Just a harsh reality where the only thing that mattered was survival. "I'm done, Dad," Jack said, his voice now firm, resolute. "If I have to burn everything to the ground to make it right, I will." He turned and walked toward the door, his heart pounding in his chest. His father didn't try to stop him. He simply watched, his cold gaze boring into Jack's back as he left the study, the weight of his decision settling deeper into his bones. Jack didn't know where to go. His mind was clouded with so many thoughts, so many emotions. He had just severed ties with his father, the man who had shaped his life, but the truth had finally hit him. Jack had to make a stand. He couldn't let himself become part of his father's world. But as he drove through the darkened streets of Denver, Jack began to realize the full scope of the mess he was in. He wasn't just dealing with his father anymore. He was tangled in something much bigger, something that reached beyond the family, beyond even Jake and Nora. The criminal network was vast, and Jack was in the thick of it. His father's threats rang in his ears. If Jack didn't fall in line, there would be consequences. He reached out to Michael. "I'm done. I've cut ties with him," Jack said, his voice tight as he gripped the wheel. "But it's not over, is it? There's more." Michael's response was quick, almost too fast. "Jack, you're in danger. You need to get out of town now. You don't understand how dangerous your father really is. You've seen the extent of it. He's not just involved in laundering money. He's tied to people who won't hesitate to hurt you." Jack's stomach churned. He knew Michael was right. His father's words haunted him, and the sense of impending danger grew stronger with each passing second. "Where do I go?" Jack asked. His voice was barely a whisper, lost in the tension that hung thick in the air. "Meet me at the old warehouse. I've got something that will help. But you need to hurry." Jack parked his car a few blocks away from the warehouse, the cold wind biting at his skin as he stepped out. The city was eerily quiet, the sound of his footsteps echoing through the empty streets. The warehouse loomed ahead, its shadow stretching long across the pavement. Inside, Michael was waiting for him, his eyes scanning the surroundings nervously. "We don't have much time," Michael said, urgency in his voice. "Your father knows you're coming. We need to move fast." "What's going on, Michael? What do you have for me?" Jack asked, his mind racing. He needed answers, and he needed them now. Michael pulled out a thick file and handed it to Jack. "This is everything. The full extent of your father's operations. The people he's involved with. You need to know who's pulling the strings. It's not just about saving yourself anymore. It's about taking them down. If you want to make sure this doesn't spiral even further, you have to take action. But be careful. There's no telling who you can trust now." Jack opened the file, scanning through the documents and photos. The more he read, the more he realized just how deep his father's ties went. There were names, dates, meetings, connections to politicians, business leaders, law enforcement. Jack's heart sank as he realized the web stretched far beyond what he had ever imagined. And then he saw it. A photo of someone he never expected. His best friend, Jake. His involvement was clearer now. Jake wasn't just a pawn, he was an active player in this dark game. The realization hit Jack like a ton of bricks. "Jake," Jack muttered, his voice low and filled with disbelief. He was in this all along. He's not just a part of this, it's his game too. Michael's face was grim. "I'm afraid so, Jack. And now you're in the middle of it. You need to decide how you're going to play this. Because there's no turning back now." Jack closed the file, his mind spinning with everything he had learned. His father, Jake, Nora. It was all connected. And he was the one caught in the middle of it all. He had no idea what would come next. But one thing was clear. If he wanted to get out of this alive, he had to fight. Stay tuned. The next chapter of this twisted journey is about to unfold. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for the latest updates. Jack stared at the files Michael had handed him, each piece of information sinking in deeper than the last. His father, Jake, and a labyrinth of connections. It was all coming together in a way that Jack had never anticipated. The implications were staggering. The people who were involved, the risks they posed, and the truth about his father's operation. It was a tangled mess, one that Jack was now entrenched in. As the weight of the situation settled on him, Jack's hands shook, though he tried to control his breathing. He needed to act. Every second he hesitated could bring him closer to being caught in the web his father had so carefully woven. But with everything on the line, his family, his life, and the truth he needed to uncover, there was no turning back. "Michael," Jack said, his voice sharp. "Jake was never just a pawn, was he? He's been in this all along. I didn't see it. I couldn't see it." Michael's face was grim, his eyes full of regret. "You didn't want to believe it. None of us do, Jack. But he's been involved in things much darker than you thought. This isn't just about money, it's about power. And now he's too deep to back out." Jack's fists clenched at his sides. "I have to find him. I have to confront him. I don't care about the risks anymore. This has gone too far." Michael hesitated, his concern still evident. "Jack, if you go after him now, you're stepping into a fight you can't win alone. You don't know what you're up against. They'll come after you. All of you. If Jake's involved with the wrong people." Jack's gaze hardened, the resolve in his voice unwavering. "I've lost everything, Michael. I don't care if they come after me. I'll deal with it. I need answers. I need to know why Jake betrayed me." Michael seemed to understand the depth of Jack's determination, but the worry on his face didn't fade. "Then we need to move fast. There's no time. If we don't do something now, Jake will slip through our fingers, and we'll be left with nothing but regret." Jack nodded, his mind already racing with the next steps. "Where is he now?" Michael reached for his phone, tapping in a few keys. "I've tracked his last known location. He's hiding out in a place we both know. The old cabin by the lake. He always used to go there when he wanted to lay low." Jack's pulse quickened. It was a place from their past. A place where they had shared so many memories. But now, that cabin would become the setting for a confrontation he had been dreading for so long. As Jack drove toward the cabin, the tension in the air was almost suffocating. His mind replayed every moment he had shared with Jake. Every laugh, every conversation, every bond they had built together. Now it felt like a lifetime ago. His best friend, the man he had trusted more than anyone else, had been hiding a darker side all along. The drive felt endless. Each passing mile brought Jack closer to the truth, but also further into a confrontation he wasn't sure he was ready for. The questions swirled in his mind. Why had Jake done this? Had he ever cared about their friendship? Or was it all just a means to an end? When Jack finally reached the cabin, the sun was beginning to set, casting an orange glow over the lake. The peaceful scene before him seemed almost surreal, a stark contrast to the storm raging in his mind. He parked his car and approached the cabin cautiously, his senses on high alert. Every crackling branch, Every rustling leaf seemed to make the world feel smaller, more suffocating. Inside, the cabin was dimly lit, the smell of stale wood and old memories hanging in the air. Jack stepped inside, his footsteps echoing in the silence. The place was unchanged, save for the dust that had accumulated over the years. It felt like stepping into the past, but it wasn't the past he had come to reclaim. It was the present, a present filled with betrayal and uncertainty. "Jake!" Jack's voice broke the silence, his tone sharp. "I know you're here." There was no response at first, only the soft creak of floorboards from the other room. Jack's heart raced, and he stepped deeper into the cabin, his instincts telling him to be ready for anything. And then he heard it, the sound of a door creaking open. Jack turned, his eyes locking with Jake's, who stood there in the doorway, looking every bit the man Jack once knew, and yet not at all. The years of friendship, the shared history, seemed to dissipate in an instant, replaced by something darker, something Jack had never seen in his eyes before. "You shouldn't have come, Jack," Jake said, his voice low, almost regretful. "I don't care about the consequences anymore," Jack snapped, his emotions raw. "I need answers, Jake. Why? Why did you do it? Why betray me? Why betray us?" Jake's face softened for a moment, and Jack could see a flicker of hesitation in his eyes. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared. "You never understood, did you? You never saw the bigger picture. It was never about you, Jack. It was about survival. It was about power." Jack stepped forward, his anger bubbling over. "Survival? By using me? By using everything I've worked for?" Jake's expression hardened, and he crossed his arms over his chest. "You were too busy playing by the rules to see what was really going on. This world doesn't work that way, Jack. People like you, people who want to fix everything and make it right, they're just pawns in the game. You were always a pawn." Jack's chest tightened with a mixture of disbelief and rage. "You're a liar, Jake. All this time you were using me. And for what? To get deeper into this. To cover up your crimes." Jake sighed, as if Jack's anger was a tiresome thing. "You still don't get it, do you? This was never about friendship. It was never about you and me. This was about keeping the operation going. About ensuring our place at the top. You were just a convenient cover. That's the truth." Jack's hands shook with fury. "You're sick, and I can't be a part of this anymore. You've crossed a line, Jake." Jake's gaze never wavered. "You always were the idealist, Jack. But now you're just another casualty of this game." The air between them thickened, the silence deafening. Jack's heart pounded in his chest, every nerve alert to the danger he now faced. This wasn't just a confrontation. It was the culmination of everything that had been building. Jack's life, his trust, his very future, hung in the balance. And then, Jake moved, swift and decisive, reaching for something hidden at his side. Jack reacted instinctively, diving to the side as Jake's hand came up, revealing a gun. Cold, metallic, and deadly. "I didn't want it to come to this," Jake said, his voice filled with a strange kind of finality. "But you've left me no choice." The room seemed to freeze as Jack stared at Jake, the gun now aimed directly at him. His mind raced, his heart pounding in his ears. Everything had led to this moment, the betrayal, the lies, the secrets, and now it was all coming to a head. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to stay tuned for the heart-stopping conclusion to Jack's journey. The cabin was still, as if time itself had slowed to a crawl. Jack's heart hammered in his chest as he locked eyes with Jake, the gun now aimed squarely at him. The tension between them was thick enough to cut with a knife. The man he had once called his best friend, the man he had trusted with his life, was now holding a weapon, ready to pull the trigger. "Jake, don't do this," Jack said, his voice low, trying to keep the desperation from seeping through. His hands were raised slightly, palms open, as if trying to show he wasn't a threat, even though every part of him screamed to act. He knew he couldn't back down. Not now. Jake's grip on the gun tightened, his expression hardened. "You don't get it, do you? You never understood. This whole thing, this mess, it was never about friendship. It was about survival. It's always been about survival. You were just a convenient tool to keep the game going. Jack could barely comprehend what Jake was saying. The idea that their entire relationship had been built on lies, manipulation, and deceit was too much to process. But there was one thing Jack was sure of now. He had to get out of this room alive, and he had to stop Jake from making the biggest mistake of his life. Survival, Jack repeated, his voice shaking but firm. You're telling me this is about survival? By betraying me, your friend? Your partner? You're throwing everything away for what? For money? For power? Is that really all this is? Jake's eyes flickered for a moment, and Jack saw a slight hesitation. The gun wavered just slightly in Jake's grip, and for a split second, Jack thought he might be able to reach him. But then the look in Jake's eyes hardened again, and Jack knew he was fighting a losing battle. You don't understand, Jake said, his voice growing more distant, like he was speaking to a stranger. You're weak, Jack. You always were. You don't have the stomach for what it takes. You don't have what it takes to win. You never did. The words hit Jack like a slap. All these years, all the moments they had shared, Jake had never seen him for who he was. And now, Jack saw his best friend for what he really was. A man consumed by greed, willing to destroy anyone in his path to get what he wanted. Jack's eyes narrowed, his frustration mounting. I don't need to win, Jake. I just need to do what's right. And what's right is stopping you before you destroy everything. There was a long, agonizing pause as Jack and Jake locked eyes, the distance between them seeming impossibly wide. Jack could see the conflict in Jake's gaze, the cracks in his facade, but it was fleeting. Jake's resolve had already been set, and Jack knew, deep down, there was nothing left to save. Do you really think this will end well for you? Jack asked, his voice steady despite the fear pulsing through his veins. You can't just walk away from this. There are people out there, dangerous people. You've already made enemies that you can't run from. It's over, Jake. Jake's face twisted with anger. It's not over. You just don't get it. He stepped forward, keeping the gun trained on Jack. If you think for 1 second that this is just going to magically fix itself, you're wrong. I don't care about the people I've hurt. I care about getting out. And I will do whatever it takes. Jack's mind raced. He knew this was a turning point, the moment when everything would either break or come together. His whole life had led to this, facing down his best friend, his betrayer, in a cabin by the lake. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about justice, about righting the wrongs that had been done to him and those he loved. And just as Jake stepped closer, Jack's instincts kicked in. He saw the shift in Jake's posture, the brief moment of vulnerability as the anger took over. Jack used that split second of hesitation to make his move. In a blur, Jack dove to the side, grabbing a chair and knocking it into Jake's legs, throwing him off balance. The gun fired into the air as Jake stumbled back, and Jack used the chaos to scramble for cover. His heart was pounding, his mind sharp with adrenaline, but he didn't take his eyes off Jake for a second. Jake, listen to me, Jack shouted, trying to keep the confrontation under control. You don't have to do this. This isn't you. You don't have to end up like this. Jake's eyes narrowed, fury radiating off him. This is me, Jack. This is who I've always been. You just never saw it. Jack couldn't believe what he was hearing. The man who had been his brother, his closest friend, had fallen so far. But Jack wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. Not without trying to bring Jake back from the edge. Jake, it doesn't have to end like this, Jack repeated, his voice firm. I'm done with the lies. I'm done with the games. But you can still walk away. You can still make the right choice. Don't let them win. Don't let them control you. For a moment, it seemed like Jake was listening. His hand trembled slightly, and Jack could see the hesitation in his eyes again. The gun wavered, and Jack's breath caught in his chest. But then, in the blink of an eye, everything changed. A loud crash came from the back door of the cabin, followed by the sound of heavy footsteps. Jake turned sharply, his attention momentarily diverted. Jack didn't waste a second. He dove for the nearest window, crashing through the glass as the sound of footsteps approached. As Jack hit the ground outside, his heart raced. The world felt like it was moving in slow motion. The cold night air hit his face as he scrambled to his feet, his body bruised but alive. He didn't know who was coming through the door, but it wasn't just Jake he had to worry about anymore. The stakes had just been raised. Jack turned, bolting into the woods behind the cabin. His mind was clouded with the rush of survival instinct. Who was after him now? Had Jake called for help? Or had his father sent someone to silence him once and for all? The sound of heavy boots crashing through the underbrush came closer, and Jack didn't hesitate. He ran faster, pushing his body past its limits. His entire life had led to this moment, and now he was on the run. Everything he thought he knew about the world had been upended in a matter of hours, and now, his only option was to keep moving forward. As he ran deeper into the woods, Jack realized that this wasn't just about confronting his past anymore. It was about survival. It was about taking down the system that had ensnared him, and it was about finally getting answers, no matter the cost. He wouldn't stop until he had the truth. Not until he could face the people who had destroyed his life, and stop them before they destroyed everyone else's. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. The story's not over yet, and the real danger is just beginning. Jack's breath came in ragged gasps as he sprinted through the dense woods, the moonlight barely penetrating the thick trees. His heart was racing, his thoughts scattered, but the one thing that kept him going was the knowledge that he couldn't stop now. Not after everything he'd uncovered. Not after everything he'd lost. He heard the sounds of footsteps behind him, heavier now, closer. Whoever had come through the back door of the cabin wasn't giving up. The forest around him seemed to close in, the shadows threatening to swallow him whole. But Jack wasn't afraid, not anymore. He'd faced down the darkest parts of his life, and he wasn't about to be taken down now. As he pushed his body harder, faster, the world around him seemed to blur. His mind was fixed on only one thing: survival. But survival alone wouldn't be enough. He needed answers. He needed justice. And, above all, he needed to stop the people who had been pulling the strings all along. Suddenly, the sound of the footsteps stopped. Jack slowed, cautiously scanning his surroundings. His heart pounded in his chest, the adrenaline still coursing through his veins. Was it Jake? Had he been caught? Or was it something worse? A crack of a twig beneath someone's foot broke the silence. Jack froze. "Jack!" A voice called out from the darkness. It was Michael. Relief flooded through Jack's body, but it was quickly replaced by confusion. "Michael? What are you doing here?" Michael emerged from the shadows, his face grave. "I had to make sure you were okay. I told you this isn't over. They're going to come after you. And we need to stop them before it's too late." Jack ran a hand through his hair, exasperated. "What are you talking about? We need to get out of here. It's over. Jake's gone. My father's gone. They've both lost. They're not the threat anymore. They're coming for me." Michael stepped closer, his eyes sharp. "No, Jack. You don't get it. It's not just about your father or Jake anymore. They're part of a much larger operation. Your father was just the tip of the iceberg. There's more. There are people who will stop at nothing to protect their interests. And now you're at the center of it. You've been marked." Jack's stomach twisted. "What do we do now?" Michael's expression softened for the first time in hours. "We take them down. Together." The next few days were a blur for Jack. After the confrontation in the woods, he and Michael worked quickly to piece together the remaining elements of the operation. They contacted authorities, ones they knew they could trust, discreetly passing on the files, evidence, and intelligence that Jack had gathered. The storm had passed, but there was still much work to be done. Jack's life, once defined by the idealistic dreams of a successful businessman, had been turned upside down. Now it was defined by something darker, a desire for justice. He had learned that no amount of success or power could protect you from the lies of those closest to you. But he also learned that he had the strength to fight back, to take control of his own fate. As the investigation into his father's network unfolded, it became clear that the rot ran deeper than anyone had imagined. The authorities unearthed connections to corrupt politicians, shady businessmen, and even law enforcement officers who had long turned a blind eye to the illicit operations. The people who had once controlled Jack's life were now being exposed, their empire of deceit crumbling piece by piece. But the consequences of Jack's actions weren't without their own cost. His business was in disarray, his reputation tarnished by the association with his father's illegal dealings. Jack knew it would take years to rebuild, but for the first time in a long while he didn't mind. The price of his integrity, his honesty, was steep, but he would pay it. As for Nora, Jack's heart still ached for her. The woman he had loved, the woman he had built a life with, had betrayed him in a way he never thought possible. He tried to reach out to her, to offer her a chance at redemption, but she had disappeared. Whether out of guilt, fear, or some deeper need to escape, Jack never got the answers he sought from her. He realized in time that he had to let go. He couldn't fix everything. Sometimes the only thing you could do was walk away. And as for Jake, Jack's former best friend, well, Jack had to come to terms with the fact that some people couldn't be saved. No matter how much you wanted to believe in them, some people were beyond redemption. Jack would always carry the scar of that betrayal, but he knew he couldn't let it define him. He had to move forward to find his own way. The final blow came when Jack received a message from Michael, one that sealed the fate of the entire operation. The investigation had gone public, and those involved were being brought to justice. Jack's father, Jake, and the others in the network were all arrested, their empire dismantled by the very people they had tried to control. For the first time in Jack's life, he felt a sense of peace, knowing that justice had been served. The world he had once inhabited, full of greed and corruption, was behind him. Months later, Jack stood at the site of a new project, his first major construction job since the fallout. He was standing on solid ground, a place that he had worked tirelessly to reclaim. The land in front of him was empty now, but in a few years it would be full of life again. He could see it in his mind's eye, a community that would be built on trust, integrity, and respect, a reflection of the man he had become. Jack took a deep breath, letting the fresh air fill his lungs. He had learned a lot over the past months about betrayal, about trust, and about the cost of standing up for what was right. But the most important lesson he had learned was this: you can't change the past, but you can shape the future. He walked away from the site, his head held high, a quiet sense of determination in his step. The world was wide open for him now, and he was ready to face whatever came next, on his terms. And though the scars of his past would always be there, they no longer defined him. He had survived the storm. Now he was ready to build something new. Thanks for watching and following Jack's journey. It's been a wild ride filled with betrayal, redemption, and the ultimate battle for justice. If you enjoyed the story and want to see more thrilling recaps, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more. We've got plenty of stories to tell, and we want you to be there for every twist and turn. Until next time, stay tuned and remember, the truth always finds a way out.